Thanks for joining this Google Plus Hangout. We're going to talk a little bit about freshwater in the Arctic today. I'm Julie Gorley. I'm the senior Arctic official at the U.S. Department of State. And I'm joined by Bill Griffiths, who is the facility programs manager for the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. Bill and I are both working on various aspects of freshwater in the Arctic, and we thought we would spend a little time talking about it today. It's a topic that probably not a lot of people think about. The Arctic, when people think about the Arctic, they mostly think about a lot of ice, a lot of snow, a lot of frozen land that is above the tree line, and there's not a lot of plant growth, and there are a lot of polar bears wandering around, and all of that is true. But I think what people don't think much about, and Bill can tell me if I'm wrong, since he lives in Alaska and I'm in Washington, D.C., people don't much think about fresh water per se. They think about ice. But even when I was a kid, I didn't think much about, ice is actually fresh water. It's just something we take for granted. Well, in the Arctic, there is a lot of fresh water. There is an enormous amount of fresh water in the Greenland ice sheet. For example, if you look on the map, you'll always see a depiction of Greenland as all white. And that's because it's covered in ice, and ice is fresh water. Also in the Arctic, there is a lot of fresh water in mountain glaciers and in lakes, believe it or not. There are lots of lakes in the Arctic. There are lots of rivers in the Arctic. And in the Russian Arctic, all of the rivers flow into the Arctic Ocean. They flow northward. There's a lot of snow that falls in the Arctic. There's even groundwater in the Arctic that is part of the constitution of permafrost. And so there's a lot of water in the Arctic that isn't saltwater, isn't ocean saltwater. And now that climate change is happening, there is a lot of water coming into the global hydrologic system. So with temperatures rising more rapidly in the Arctic than elsewhere in the world, there's a lot of this ice that's melting into water, and that water has to go somewhere. So a lot of water, fresh water, is going right into the Arctic Ocean. And the Arctic Ocean, in turn, cycles throughout the entire oceanic system. So there's a freshwater push from the Arctic into the rest of the ocean system. And of course, that can contribute to sea level rise, which is what most people think about when they think of the Arctic melting. But it also contributes to changing ocean chemistry and pH and salinity and all of those other effects that freshwater mixed in with saltwater would have. So there are all kinds of effects that could potentially happen to the ecosystem in the oceans in the world and to the land-based ecosystems, including the human ecosystem that rely on fresh water. And so with all of these factors in mind, and with climate change having these huge effects in the Arctic and melting and thawing a large part of that part of the world, we made freshwater in the Arctic a priority of the United States chairmanship of the Arctic Council, which is an intergovernmental body of the 8 countries with land territory above the Arctic Circle, including the United States, and for which the United States is chairing from April 25th of last year, 2015, until mid-May of 2017. So we're about in the middle of the United States chairmanship of the Arctic Council. And one of the important projects to come out of the Arctic Council is something called the Arctic Freshwater Synthesis. And the Arctic Freshwater Synthesis is a very, very interesting and groundbreaking look at the state of freshwater in the Arctic. The total amount of fresh water that's there, the impacts on freshwater from climate change, and other kinds of pressures brought to bear on fresh water, including from industrial activities and human populations and all kinds of other factors that play into pressures on the water system in the Arctic. Now, probably not a lot of people think about the water up there and what its role is in the rest of the planet. Well, fresh water goes into the ocean system, as I was talking about, but it also goes into the atmosphere. So with warm, ever warming air floating over the Arctic, there's more and more evaporation of fresh water into the atmosphere, which means that weather systems can be affected. The amount of precipitation that falls in the Arctic and other parts of the world can be affected. And water overall that is melting is charging up the surface water system. So rivers flow at a higher rate. Flooding happens. The ice in rivers in the Arctic breaks up less predictably than it once did, sometimes earlier in the year, sometimes later in the year. Sea ice also breaks up at unpredictable times now. And there's less sea ice, which contains fresh water, keeping the shoreline in parts of the Arctic in place. So you have coastal erosion happening in Alaska and other places. So with all of these things coming into play, the scientific community is now starting, well, not now, has been for a while, and is continuing to really study what this all means. And Bill is one of those scientists who and is one of the people who is on the front lines of working on freshwater issues in the Arctic. And some of you might know that last week, on June 16th and 17th of 2016, Secretary of State John Kerry went up to the Arctic. On June 16th, last week, he went to Svalbard, Norway, where he talked to a lot of Arctic scientists and climate scientists about the impacts climate change is having in the Arctic, including on the frozen parts of the Arctic, the Greenland ice sheet and permafrost and the river systems and so forth. After that, he went over to Greenland, which is mostly covered in ice. There are parts of Greenland that are not covered in ice, and there are communities, many communities there. But he saw firsthand, going out on a boat into the water, firsthand the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. And he saw icebergs calving, as we say, off glaciers and off the Greenland ice sheet in various places. So he saw firsthand the freshwater incursion into the ocean system. And the scientists he talked to in Svalbard talked to him also about the freshwater issues in Antarctica, on the bottom of the planet. And of course, there's a lot of fresh water locked up in the Antarctic as well, on the Antarctic ice sheet. So there are lots and lots of issues to think about and for scientists to study related to freshwater in the Arctic. But I want to shift over to Bill and give Bill a few minutes to talk about the practical realities of freshwater issues for Arctic communities. And many Arctic communities are quite remote and very small, and their reliance on freshwater may well be in question at some point, with climate change causing lots of changes to the Arctic freshwater picture. So let me hand it over to Bill, who's going to talk about the Alaska Water and Sewer Challenge, and you'll see from him and hear from him some of these practical issues. Over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Julie. We appreciate being able to participate this morning, this afternoon. And here, as you say, in Alaska, many communities are very remote, and unlike other parts of the Arctic, most communities are not connected by road. We have almost 200 communities in Alaska that can only be reached by airplane or by boat. So these communities, in addition to being very remote, they typically tend to be smaller communities, 1,000 people or smaller oftentimes. So this situation in the Arctic makes access to fresh water very challenging. One of the reasons is that fresh water tends to be sometimes difficult to obtain. Some of these communities are located along the coast where you can't drill wells. All the water is salt water, and so it's difficult to access, let's say, a river or a lake. In other places, just because of the temperatures, of course, we don't have running water most of the year. It's frozen, so many people actually go out and collect ice and melt that for their drinking water. But our challenge in Alaska for a long time has been trying to get running water into homes along with wastewater removal. And you may not know that, many people may not know that we still have about 30 communities in Alaska that don't have running water and sewer in homes. In addition to that, we've still got hundreds or even thousands of homes in communities that have running water, but not every home is hooked up. So we have a real challenge trying to figure out how to do that with the funds that we have available. And along those lines, the state of Alaska, along with some of our federal funding agencies here in Alaska, started a project a few years ago called the Alaska Water and Sewer Challenge. The purpose of this project is to try to look at some innovative ways of bringing running water and sewer into homes that have never had it here in Alaska. And we hope in other parts of the Arctic as well, and potentially even other parts of the world that are facing challenges related to climate change, such as drought. So what we're focusing on is an unconventional approach to running water and sewer, which is at the household level rather than the community level. So we're looking at ways that communities and households can bring smaller quantities of water into their homes. There will be treatment systems within the home to allow them to recycle most of that water within the home and then remove very little wastewater from the home at the end of the cycle. So our goal is to have every person have access to 15 gallons of water per person per day. But instead of having to bring in 15 gallons for every person, we're hoping they can bring in only a fraction of that and remove a fraction of that, and again, most of that water is recycled in the home. Our primary reason that we started this project is another aspect of fresh water, which is the impact on human health. We know from recent studies that households with running water and sewer in them mean that people are much healthier. We find that homes without running water and sewer and access to sufficient quantities of water and sewer have higher incidence of skin diseases and respiratory infections. So we're interested in trying to address those issues and bring running water and sewer into homes. Another reason that we are doing this is that the cost of a traditional piped water and sewer system in the Arctic has become very, very expensive, not only to build but to operate. It takes a lot of energy to keep a running water and sewer system operational throughout the winter in Alaska and elsewhere in the Arctic. And we believe that approaching this problem at the household level could significantly reduce the operating costs for people in their homes. We're also interested in trying to improve on aspects of constructability and durability, and hopefully also avoid some of the problems that occur with freezing and thawing of community pipe systems. So these are a few of the reasons that we started this project. We're in the middle of the project now. We have 3 multi-sector teams currently working with us on the project. They're all building working prototypes in the laboratory now. We have one in Anchorage, one up in Fairbanks, and one in Tok, Alaska. These working prototypes will all be up and operational this summer. They'll go through a 9-month period of testing, and then in the next spring we'll take a look at how well they performed. And those systems that perform and meet our performance targets will move into a field system development and testing phase in 2017. So that's a little bit about the Water and Sewer Challenge project. Along the international front, I should also mention that here in Alaska, the state of Alaska is sponsoring a conference called Water Innovations for Healthy Arctic Homes. And this is an international conference which is an endorsed project of the Arctic Council's Sustainable Development Working Group. This conference will take place September 18th through the 21st here in Anchorage. And if people are interested in finding out more about that conference, they can go to the website, which is WIHAH, that stands for Water Innovations for Healthy Arctic Homes, 2016.com. And this conference will bring together health experts, engineers, scientists, and we'll be examining different themes at this conference. It's 3 days long, again, as I said, here in Anchorage in September. But we'll be looking at things like innovative approaches to bringing fresh water to homes. We'll be looking at the impacts of climate change on fresh water in the Arctic. We'll be looking at things like regulations and policies that affect access and the cost of providing water in the home.
So, Bill, that triggered a question in my mind. Do you think that Alaska is unique, or do you think other remote communities in, say, Canada and Russia, maybe Greenland, are also experiencing problems with access to water and sewer delivery in their communities?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we hope to explore in the conference, but we know that other countries are facing some of the same challenges that we are. Again, having running water and sewer in small Arctic communities has always been a challenge from a cost point of view, but climate change is bringing new challenges. It's changing access to some of the traditional water sources. It means that treatment systems that worked previously aren't working so well now. It means that places where some of the smaller communities could previously find fresh water aren't finding those sources there anymore, or they're finding those sources are moving or shifting in some way. So we know that other countries are facing some of the same challenges that we are here in Alaska.
That's very interesting, and probably something people didn't really realize so much either, that there are Americans still in the country that don't have indoor water and sewer and plumbing, and that there are lots of health issues related to that. So just a sort of a technical question, Bill, when in households that don't have indoor plumbing, I know that honey buckets are used in place of toilets. What happens, especially in Alaska, in a state that has such different climate and different weather conditions year-round from the lower latitudes, and especially the lower 48 of the U.S.? What happens to that sewage when households generate it, and where is it taken, and where does it ultimately end up?
Well, that varies a little bit from community to community, but most communities that don't have access to running water and sewer, as you said, use honey buckets, which is basically a 5-gallon bucket where liquid waste is collected. When those buckets get full, there's a bag liner. They remove the bag. Those bags get hauled off to what we call a honey bucket lagoon. Remains frozen throughout the winter time, but in the spring, those honey bucket lagoons, they melt. They can overflow. They're filled with bags and other solid waste as well. They're a real, actually, environmental hazard for the communities that have to deal with them. But really, they're not left with any alternative. They want to get that waste away from their home, so they get hauled off to a nearby lagoon somewhere.
One thing that I would mention is that in the Arctic Council, we brought this issue forward because one of the pillars of the United States chairmanship of the Council for these 2 years is improving economic and living conditions for Arctic communities. And there are so many remote communities in Alaska filled with people who want to live traditionally, a lot of indigenous peoples, but who face modernization pressures as well. And there are similar communities in Canada, not far from Alaska and across the Canadian Arctic, and also in Russia, in the Russian Arctic, which is extremely large. And people in these communities want to thrive and want to live economically sustainably and environmentally sustainably, and we owe it to them to try and find solutions and put the entrepreneurial spirit of the United States on these kinds of problems, which is why the Water and Sewer Challenge in Alaska is so important and why Bill is doing such great work. We hope that the results of this conference will be able to be publicized, and we can put it out there in the world for other thinkers to work on. Another deliverable for our chairmanship of the Arctic Council will be the Arctic Freshwater Synthesis. And one of the documents produced from this synthesis, the Arctic Freshwater System in a Changing Climate, we will tweet out the where you can find this on the web. It's a very, very interesting, roughly 25-page document that speaks in very plain language about the scientific issues and the science underpinning some of the work going on to study freshwater issues in the Arctic. So we'll get that out there for people to read. It's very, very interesting subject, and one that most people don't think about too much when they think about climate change. And I would also add that later this week, so actually starting tomorrow through Friday, President Obama will host the Global Entrepreneurial Summit out in Palo Alto, California. And there will be something like 1,500 entrepreneurs and business people and other professions at this conference. And hopefully lots of those entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial spirit will help in this process of figuring out how to improve water and sewer delivery in remote Arctic communities, and also how to manage fresh water that is being freed up because of climate change, and to maximize the benefit of Arctic freshwater for mankind. It's a big, big challenge, and it's a large part of the climate change equation. Bill, I don't know if you have any other questions, or maybe we could see if there are any questions out there that you and I can answer.
Sure, I'm happy to answer any questions that might be out there, as well as just providing any additional information for folks. I should probably mention that if anyone's interested in finding out more about the Alaska Water and Sewer Challenge Project, you can find out more information at the State of Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. We've got a link to our website. You can find out more about the communities that lack running water and sewer and some of the challenges of providing that. And as I mentioned before, you can read more about the conference taking place up here in September. And I should mention that conference, we're encouraging anyone who's interested in attending to visit the website. There's no charge for attending, but it's by invitation. So if you're interested in attending, please fill out the expression of interest at that website, and let us know why you're interested in attending, and we'll be inviting as many people as we possibly can.
And I should add that it would be great to have people come, and also great for people to get up to Alaska to see some of these magnificent glaciers while they're still able to be seen and accessed by people. It's a wonderful place. It's a wonderful part of the country, and the Arctic writ large is really a great place to see. It does look like there's a question. This might be for you, Bill. One of the people in the audience is saying that they've heard that some countries are interested in buying fresh water from Alaska, and they wonder if this is true. Before I hand it to you, I know that I have read some media accounts several years ago that there was some interest in, or possibly even an actual sale of water from Alaska to, I think it was China. But Bill, I don't know if my memory serves well, or if you can answer that question, that people are interested in buying fresh water from Alaska.
Well, we hear that often, particularly in the southeast part of our state. There's a lot of fresh water that doesn't freeze. There's an abundance of rainfall and rivers and waterfalls. People often talk about if there was only a way to get all that abundance of water maybe piped south to some of the drought areas in southwest U.S. People have looked at mega projects like that. I don't think anything's ever sort of penciled out that way. But the other thing that people often look at is ways to, bottle some of the glacier-fed water that we have here in Alaska and export it. And I know that some of the entrepreneurs are taking a pretty good look at that and trying to make that work as well.
And I know that I've read another account in one of the major media outlets of a program to sell glacier water from Icelandic glaciers, I think a few years ago. And if memory serves, I think it may have ended up not going very well, maybe even a Ponzi scheme or something. But certainly there is interest in towing icebergs. I think I've heard recently that some countries, maybe Saudi Arabia might have been one of them, is interested in possibly towing glaciers from Antarctica to serve to serve water needs in that country. So the economics of all of this, of course, are probably not very good. Shipping water through empty oil tankers is another possible way of moving water around that I've heard. Single hull oil tankers are coming offline through requirements of the International Maritime Organization to use double hull tankers for shipping oil, at least. And so there may be possibilities for using tankers to ship water around the world. But again, it would be terribly expensive, and who knows what could happen if the situation becomes quite desperate in other parts of the world that are water poor. But for now, it doesn't seem, at least, like it's very economically feasible. Another interesting part of our chairmanship of the Arctic Council related to water happened earlier this year. Last summer, we went out through a program the State Department has called Diplomacy Lab, where we reach out to universities across the country and explore interest by students, undergraduate and graduate students, in doing some thinking and research on diplomatic topics and foreign policy topics. And we went out to the community, the university community, and with a pitch to do some work on fresh water. And we got some interest back, and ultimately Indiana University and Purdue University of Indiana, IUPUI, came back and did a project for us. And they looked at a little bit less about the science, although they certainly looked at the state of the science on Arctic freshwater, but also looked at the economics and the possibilities of moving that water around the world. And their conclusions were also that the economics are pretty tricky right now, but certainly entrepreneurs and creative people may come up with different solutions. Who knows? It's a very interesting topic, and an interesting time to be thinking about global politics around water, and certainly an interesting time for scientists who study global water systems and the hydrologic system to be thinking about what role the Arctic plays in that arena. I think we have another question. Do the Nordic countries have any systems or technology that would help those in Alaska? I think they do, probably. Certainly the Nordic countries are part of the Arctic Council and have been invited in to work on freshwater issues. But Bill, I don't know if you have participation coming up at the conference this fall from the Nordic countries and what their contributions might be. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. We are hoping to get some participation from the Nordic countries. In particular, we've got a couple of our contacts hopefully coming in from Norway. We know that they have employed some fairly innovative approaches to water treatment and wastewater treatment, usually at the community level, although that's something we're interested in as well. So yes, we think they probably do have some good things to share, and we're looking forward to having that exchange at our conference.
Certainly. Also, I know that in the foreign policy arena, water, food, and energy are sort of all interrelated, and I suspect probably the Nordic countries have have some expertise there as well, given especially their expertise in renewable energy. And food security is another very live issue in the Arctic Council and in Arctic communities. It's, so water, sewer, food, electricity generation, all of those are very important issues for community sustainability. And I think the results of your conference will be very useful, not only throughout the Arctic, but perhaps throughout in other parts of the world that are water poor. Technology plays such an important role in the quality of life in the Arctic, and I think we're very excited in the State Department to see the outcome of your conference and the other water and sewer and health issues that are going on in the Council, and the continuation of the scientific studies of the Arctic hydrologic system. It's going to be it's a very interesting time, so we're pretty excited about it all here at the State Department. I think that's that about wraps it up. Bill, if you have any parting words, I think we'll just wrap it up.
Okay, I just want to thank you again for the opportunity, and we look forward to hearing from folks about their interest in the conference or in the Alaska Water and Sewer Challenge.
Thanks so much, Bill, and thanks everyone for joining us for this Google Plus Hangout.